there are three parts. This is going to be a short talk, but there are going to be three parts. And in the first part, I want to focus for a second on those medics and corpsmen whose work ensured that the number of people we remember today is actually smaller. And we have a number of combat veterans here today, and I imagine that some of those combat veterans here know firsthand about what the medics and what the corpsmen, what they did, what the crew chiefs on the medevac helicopters did, what those pilots on the medevac helicopters did. And this quote, in 22 years of interviewing combat veterans, this quote that I have here comes from a discussion I had just on Friday. He was a crew chief. Charles Weldon was a crew chief on a medevac helicopter in Vietnam, 1967, 1968. And I can't do justice to the way Mr. Weldon said what he said. I strongly encourage you to look this up. It's the most powerful, moving 90 seconds of recollections that I've heard from someone who had his kind of job. But here's what he said. He said, I would pick up these wounded kids. You'd hoist them into your helicopter, and once they were off that ground and in that helicopter, to see their faces, the relief. I don't know how to describe it. It was like something just jumped off them. The weight lifted, and I'd watch as we'd come out of there. As we would pick up speed, and I would watch them feel the air, the coolness of the air. They had been down in the sweltering, the terrible area down there. The heat was oppressive. And then that coolness would reach their face, and I'd watch them close their eyes, and their whole demeanor changed. I saw the fear in their eyes. I saw that they were scared. They were wounded. There was blood everywhere. Their uniforms are tattered. And I just look at their faces. And it's just a relief to get in that helicopter, to get them back to some place that's clean, safe, that they can get cared for. So I think back on that. I think, wow, that's pretty awesome. Of course, today, we especially remember those who did not survive, and Charles Weldon, of course, saw that too. He did mention the wounded they would pick up in his medevac helicopter, but en route to the medical center, wherever they were going, the wounded soldier, the wounded Marine did not make it. And those are the ones that we focus on today. And of course, as I say that, I know that a number of the veterans here have in their mind's eye faces. And if we flip the page, we can see some faces from different wars of those lost in these wars. I want to tell you a little bit about some of these lost veterans, and then others who today still remember them and still speak of them. First, if you look at the screen in black there, we have Alan Gunn, Harry Brown, Wade Goff. Harry Brown himself was a medic. These actually were three who served on a medevac helicopter, but this helicopter itself was lost. And so among the many we remember today are Alan and Harry and Wade, and these three are still missing, along with a fourth member of their crew, still missing, still unaccounted for. And Mr. Eaton mentioned the Defense POW MIA accounting agency, which is expending tremendous time and resources and energy, doing everything it can to find the remains of our lost from Vietnam, from the Second World War, from Korea. We see the image on the top left there of Frank Fazekas. Frank he was a fighter pilot over France, shot down in the spring of 1944. His remains were not recovered until 2017. But those remains were positively identified, and now the family members of Frank Fazekas have definite knowledge of what became of Frank. Beneath Frank, there's a photograph there of Charles, who works at the University of Wisconsin, and who has a very, very busy job, but who also is devoted to spending time in the summers to bring students from the University of Wisconsin to sites where they think remains might be. And he has played a key role in the recovery of remains of 3 fallen service members in Europe. Next to Frank is Delbert Holliday, who was killed in action in present-day North Korea in 1950. Although his remains were not identified until 2018, the remains were buried at the National Cemetery in Honolulu. But next to him is Dawn. And Dawn works with the Defense POW MIA accounting agency. And Dawn played a key role in helping to identify the remains of Delbert that were at that National Cemetery, and to be able to say definitively, these are specifically Delbert's remains. And so now Delbert's family members have some definite knowledge about that. And also, Dawn is Canadian. She's so committed to this cause of finding American missing service personnel. This was her primary motivation for becoming an American citizen. And at this moment, she's in Honolulu with the DPAA involved in this very important work. On the top right is Andrew Brassfield. His name came up when I was interviewing the person just to the left of him. That's a veteran named H. Lee Barnes, who lives in Nevada now. He was a Green Beret in Vietnam in 1966, and as H. Lee Barnes and I were talking about his time in Vietnam, he mentioned another Green Beret who went missing in 1970. We still don't know where Andrew is. But I do know that the DPAA is looking for him. And so these are other names that we remember today: Frank, Delbert, Andrew. And then in the middle on the left, we see James Mills. He flew off the USS Coral Sea in September 1966. His plane went down in the water off the coast of Vietnam. It wasn't until 2018 that remains were found and he was positively identified. And to the right of James is Ann mills-griffiths, who has been the civilian probably most responsible, most persistent when it comes to finding the missing and to accounting for prisoners. And she leads the National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia. And next to Ann mills-griffiths is Director Kelly McKee of the DPAA. What's most impressive to me about Ann mills-griffiths is not only that she's devoted more than 40 years to the promotion of the cause of finding the remains of the missing, but when her own brother's remains were identified in 2018, she could justly have said, I've been at this for 4 decades, more. I've been at it for actually close to 5 decades. My own brother's remains have been found. That's good. I'm done. I'll pass the torch to someone else. But that's not what she's done. She's still at it. Because the mission is bigger than herself. It's even bigger than her own brother. There are still thousands of missing service members out there whose remains need to be found. And we're at it. So we remember today the medics and the corpsmen whose work ensured that there are fewer people to remember today on Memorial Day than there otherwise would have been without their work. But then, of course, we remember those who did not come home, who did not survive their conflicts. And among them are James and Delbert and Andrew and Frank, Alan, Harry, and Wade. And then lastly, I was recently thinking a lot about these 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds in the Second World War, because, of course, we recently just observed the 75th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe. 75 years ago today, the war in the Pacific was still going, but 75 years ago today, the war in Europe had been wrapped up. And this image that is down on the bottom came to my mind again and again, this famous image of these guys, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 years old, getting off these Higgins boats and moving ashore on D-Day. And we know how things turned out. They had no idea what they were walking into. And as I was thinking about them, I was thinking about an idea that in our world we often want to ask what we do and what do we think. I think it's important also to ask what the people who lived before us would think, and what the people who live after us will think. 20 years from now, what will they say about what we did? 50, 70 years from now, what will they say about what we did? And if these young men getting off this Higgins boat could somehow have shown to them a recording of what we are doing, I wonder what they would think. And I have a sense of obligation to them, just as they had a sense of obligation to us. Some of their families voted for President Roosevelt. Some of their family members voted for other candidates. But here they had a common mission and a common cause and a common obligation. And actually, as I was looking at the handout that was given to us that just gives us the rundown of what we're doing today, there's a quote at the top of that. And I thought that this sort of fits perfectly. So if you look at I forget the right word, but if you look at the piece of paper that was given to you that gives us the order of events today, there's a quote at the top. And here's what it says: "Please join in remembrance and respect of those who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country." And that part of our prayer today should be for those who can say, and here's the quote, "I have fought when others feared." And there are things worth fighting for. There are things worth fighting for in our world, in our country, in our communities, in our personal lives. There are things worth fighting for. And sometimes folks don't rise to the occasion. But in respect to these young men who got off that boat on that day, June 6, 1944, I want to fight for what's worth fighting for. And I want to encourage my students to fight for what's worth fighting for. And we may actually disagree sometimes on what's worth fighting for. And we may actually disagree on how we should go about fighting for things. But if we move ahead with integrity, if we move ahead with civility, if we move ahead with strength, then our country will be better for it. And the quote goes on, "I have gone where others failed to go. I have lost friends in war and strife." Many of you know about that firsthand. "Who valued duty more than love of life." And so I think of those medics and those corpsmen and their incredible work. I think of these young men who got off that boat that day and headed onto the beaches of Normandy not knowing what was coming. I think of those who are lost, and we've mentioned some of their names today. I think of those among us who every day are thinking about how to keep the remembrances of these people alive. I want to be faithful to them all. I want to be faithful to them all. And I hope that all of us have that same commitment.